Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon, and in a week's time I will be flying out to LAX and then making my way down to Anaheim for the Pokemon World Championships 2017. Today we're going to be discussing the top 10 decks that I believe are the best plays for Worlds, and why people are considering all these different archetypes. I'm still testing away. I mean, it's a bit squeaky bum time now. I've limited it to like 4 archetypes, but there's still a load up I'm having to test because there's so many new archetypes out there. But we're going to continue anyway and see how this all goes. So, hope you all enjoy. Right, first of all, we have Metagross in at number 10. Metagross is an interesting archetype, revitalized sort of in a way because of Necrozma, the new GX Pokemon that we gain from Burning Shadows. He is a pretty cool main attacker that you can play now in the deck to give yourself a non-fire weak Pokemon to have in your active slot. One of the big Achilles heels of Metagross previously has been that fire type weakness, and Necrozma provides a different active Pokemon. However, it's still 180 HP, so Volt can probably still one-hit it regardless. But it just means that sometimes maybe you could play a Hex Maniac as the Metagross player and limit a Volk from getting a one-shot, or at least forcing them to like Guzma out something, for example. So I think Volk isn't a good matchup for Metagross still, for sure, but potentially it's a little bit better. And also the cool things about Necrozma is you can hit much better numbers than you used to be able to. You're able to pile up even like a 4th energy onto Necrozma, and you can one-hit things like Decidueyes if you have 4 Psychics hitting the discard pile with Prismatic Burst. So that's really cool. And you gain the Black Ray GX attack, which is really cool. Metagross pretty much has 3 different GX options now. It has Algorithm, Black Ray, and also Tapu Cure. So you can pick your poison basically for the matchup. Black Ray pretty good at setting up the Espeon EX combo, which I think is going to be a really important combo for Worlds, because there's a handful of Stage 2 archetypes out there, and even some Stage 1 GXs don't like getting devolved at all. So Necrozma's a really good card, and he fits really nicely into the Metagross archetype. The main reason people are talking about Metagross once again is because of Gardevoir GX's hype, and having a near enough auto win to that deck is going to be pretty cool for you. Additionally, you have a good Ninetales for similar reasons. You hit them for weakness, for the one-hit KOs, and they are rarely able to one-hit you back, as the Metagross at the very least. And Vikavolt Bulu, similar story, they can't one-hit you, you can one-hit them, and that feels like a fairly good matchup in your favour. Maybe a Hex on either side can swing that matchup a little bit, but I would have Metagross favoured going into the game. Unfavourables, as I said, Volk is still hard for you, for sure, because they can still one-hit the Necrozmas, they can do a sort of 2-for-2 trade a lot of the time. But as long as you can keep up with the attacks, it should be okay. And the main thing is they're attacking something that isn't Metagross, which means the following turn you still have the Geotech system on the board, so you can actually set up another attacker. So throwing Necrozmas their way and doing a 2-for-2 is much more satisfying for you as the Metagross player, rather than having to sort of do a 2-for-1 if their Baby Volt gets a bunch of steam ups. Or even in early turns, they just get so many aggressive KOs on like Beldums as the Baby Volk. Now that may not be the case so much because you've led a Necrozma instead, so it becomes a lot easier, and it actually becomes winnable now, but I still have it unfavoured. And Greninja's also hard because they can Shadow Stitch basically you out of the game, which is problems. You can see on my hot text I've got Pokemon Ranger. One of the reasons will indeed be for that Greninja matchup. You have to be wary of that. Necrozma can one-shot Greninjas, even breaks, so if you're Rangering, maybe you're keeping up in the game. I still think it'll be very bad for you. Espeon EX is definitely the tech I'd play in Necrozma Metagross for sure. And Tapu Koko is actually an interesting one. The Baby Koko is just a one-of. Provides an extra decent lead for you as a free retreater, but also combines with this Black Ray GX attack from Necrozma to actually give you an auto win against Mega Ray. So you can do a Black Ray GX turn, and you can do a Tapu Koko Flying Flip turn, and you've probably knocked out 3 Shaymins because Ray has to have a full board to start dealing with like Necrozmas and Metagross and stuff. So that could be a really cool option if you're worried about Rayquaza as the Metagross player. It shouldn't be the most difficult matchup for you anyway, because 250 is out of Ray's reach, but because Ray can spam Hex, it can still be awkward. So maybe a Koko in there could be pretty cool. So the Archetype gains a pretty cool new partner, and that allows a lot of different tricks for the deck and does change a handful of matchups, so it's one to explore for certain. In at number 9 we do have Vikavolt Bulu. This is another one that I've profiled on the channel recently, and it's one that I am quite a big fan of, to be fair. It has some decent favourables, Greninja being one of them, because you can start pressuring with Horn Attack so early on in the game, and you can build up with Strong Charge 2 Grass-type Bulus that are just tearing through the Greninjas each time, and you have healing on top of that. Very difficult for the Greninja to set up damage, and normally they just fall too far behind. And also Golisopod, I believe, is good for you. They are rarely hitting 180 unless they are playing like a heavy Lurantis build, which I'm seeing not being too popular because a heavy Lurantis build won't have much answer to Volk. So I've seen more Golisopods be centered around things like Zoroark and Eevees. That is fairly easy for you because you can tank hits, get value from your GX attack. Maybe like Lysandering up a Lele with a Choice Band on the Bulu, you can KO things with Tapu Wilderness, take 2 prizes and heal fully, which really negates the Golisopod, and at the same time, Nature's Judgment with that discard, and again, Choice Band pushes you into one-shotting the Golisopods, and Golisopod is a deck that wants to do the whole bouncing thing with Acerola and scoop-ups, so denying that is just going to mean you carve through their board quite quickly. Unfavourables, I think Vileplume's a problem because you're trying to set up the stage 2, and typically it's a 1-3-1 line of Vikavolt, and it's going to be hard for you to access the one-off Charger Bug, especially under the lock. And as I mentioned, Metagross, don't think it's your worst matchup, but it's definitely not like one you want to face. I feel like Vikabulu on the whole doesn't have anything below like 30%. I think it can stand up to almost any deck if you just have the right rub of the green. It's really more about how your own hand is as the Vikavolt Bulu player rather than whatever your opponent's playing. I was actually struggling to find unfavourables for the deck because once it gets rolling, it's very good. It's just how often you can get going and how consistent you can make the list. I think it has been optimised to a good standard, and I'm a big fan of my own list personally. No surprise there, but yeah, I think it could be pretty good. In terms of new additions, Guzma's the only one I could really think of. It basically saves you like an Olympia spot that you may have used to have played. So gaining 1 space in the deck is handy because this is a tight deck. A couple of techs. Tapu Koko again, the baby Koko is good in here. You can do a 20 spread on things. Going to be really important against the likes of Gardevoir GX. So you can put them all on 20. So then your Nature's Judgment are getting 1-hit KOs on the Guardies, which could be very good for you. Additionally, Tapu Koko, just a 1-prize attacker, slap a Choice Band on there, Strong Charge to him a bunch, and he can also 1-hit KO Rayquazas. So you can do a 2-for-1 trade in that regard, and then maybe you can just pick off some Shamans with the Bulu or something to round out that game and keep up with the prize race. So that again may not be the worst matchup for you. And the final one's Professor Kukui. In a similar vein to the baby Koko, you can just continue to one-shot things like Guardy and push yourself that little bit further against other stage 2 Pokemon, so that could be again a pretty good tech option. Again, it's one I'm kind of a fan of. It's very simple and pretty decent. In number 8 we have a new archetype, the Golisopod Variants. I've been vague here because there's many things that people are experimenting with. I've not personally found my favourite yet, but I think the most popular one that I'm anticipating will be like a Zoroark stage 1 archetype with Golisopod as the focal point. It's a pretty good aggressive card. Just doing those early first impressions is great aggression, and early prizes on lower HP Pokemon for sure, and setting up other GXs very nicely is pretty good for you. Its other attacks are still fine. They get hated on a lot, but they're absolutely fine. Just slapping an extra DC on are great options for you. One I'm actually trying out is Golisopod Vileplume. It sounds like a pretty clunky deck, but it sort of functions almost like Vespivile in a way. A lot less all-in than Vespivile, and your turn 1 is very simple. You just want to get a first impression off. Then your following turns are consisting of armor presses, crossing cuts, other first impressions, and then you just have like heavy Guzma, heavy Acerola in there. It's one that I'm trying out, and I think it's a pretty good Plume variant, to be honest. But I think the more popular one is probably going to be... Whoops, I dropped my pen. It's going to be the stage 1 stuff, so that's sort of what I've based the matchup chart around. Favourables, Greninja is always going to be good for you because the grass typing, the high HP, the fact that you can pick up your Pokemon and wipe damage off the board is going to be incredible. And I've also put Garbodor Variants as strong here. First impression, obviously doing 120 is a golden benchmark. And because you can do that, and because typically the backup attacker for Garbodor is going to be Drampa, you can tank hits as the Golisopod and then just Acerola back up. Typically, because you need so little in the matchup, you shouldn't have to go overboard on items, and that means you can stay out of range for the majority of the game, at least to put you far enough ahead to close it before Garbodors get way too out of control. Additionally, because Golisopod plays so many Guzmas, so many Acerolas as well, but specifically Guzma, it means you can just target down the Garbodors so they never become the late game threat for you. Unfavourables, Volk is going to be an issue, even if you do play the Vaporeon and other stage 1s like Zoroark. I don't think it's going to be amazing at any point. And Mega Rayquaza is also awkward. Again, you could play something like the Jolteon as a one-of, or you could just play Sudowoodo, as you can see, as one of my techs. That will, of course, swing the matchup. Sudowoodo is difficult to deal with, but do you actually want to spend a slot just to beat Rayquaza, which may not be the most popular archetype? Who knows? That's up to you to find out. My final other hot tech is Oranguru. I really like it in at least the stage 1 sort of boxy build of Golisopod. I've just loved Oranguru in a lot of decks, and it feels like Golisopod specifically, because of the text on first impression, it pretty much means you always need to hit yourself a Guzma, a DCE, or an Acerola every single turn to make sure you're not just doing a pathetic prod of 30 damage. So Oranguru is going to help you close out games, and that's pretty important. So yeah, Golisopod Variants. I'd like to hear from you guys if you think there's any other ones that I'm sleeping on. But right now I'm seeing Eevees, and I myself am testing a Plume build as well. I think these are some of the best ones for Golisopod, and he could show up because he's just a good aggressive stage 1 Pokemon that's also pretty tanky. In at number 7 we have Ninetales GX. This is just a straight Ninetales build. It's actually really impressed me as of late after doing very well at the Liverpool Regional Championships, the last regionals that we had before the Burning Shadows came into play. We have got a new couple of additions from Burning Shadows as well to even boost this archetype. We get the non-GX Alolan Ninetales, the one with a really annoying ability, the Pyroar basically, for any of you who played back in Flashfire era. And you also gain Acerola, which sort of doubles up alongside the Ice Path GX, which is already really annoying to get around for Ninetales. You also have Acerola now, so you can just keep spamming Ice Blade in early turns, setting things up for knockouts later on, and as long as they can't KO your Ninetales, you can either go for the GX attack or you can Acerola. Either are good options. Couple of hot techs. I like Professor Kukui in here. Again, like I was saying with the Tapu Bulu, you just push yourself into slightly better numbers. With a few early flying flips and a Kukui here or there, you can be one-shotting Guardies, and you can be one-shotting even other big Pokemon like Galisopods and such, so this is going to be pretty good for you. Giratina promo could also be a tech option, just because Greninja, as you can see, is otherwise a pretty bad matchup. Metagross is your other awkward one because of weakness, and because it's just too big for you to deal with in one shot, so typically Metagross gets a big amount of value. It's only really if you can do some early Cocoing, and you can add some hexing in there to slow them down. I think that's pretty much the win condition for you, but otherwise it's very grim. And then we have the favourables, Garbodor Variants. I know it did lose in the finals of Liverpool to a Garbodor variant, but I'm pretty certain that it's tipped in Ninetales' favour more often than not, just because, like I was saying with Golisopod, you don't have to do too much whilst you're presenting more of a threat than they ever will be, as long as you can keep your item usage fairly low. And Volcanion is also a favourable, another great one to have, mainly due to typing, but again, weave in a Hex, and they physically can't deal with the Ninetales, and you're getting like a 4 prizes swing based off one Hex Maniac. And when you're playing Octillery, you're often able to dig either for like Lele or VS Seeker or whatever it is to guarantee that Hex. So basically grant yourself 1 turn of Hex and you win that matchup pretty much every time. And even if you can't Hex, sometimes they can't reach the Ninetales, especially now that they're playing Fury Belts instead of Bans. That can change their math sometimes. So let's keep moving on. Ninetales, again, a cool one. I'm so undecided for Worlds. Every archetype I talk about, I can see the benefits of all of them. So, in at number 6, we have Greninja. This is one that I'm not tempted to play personally, but there are those players out there that just absolutely stick by this guy through thick and thin. He does actually have, potentially, some of the best matchups on this list. Gardevoir GX, Volcanion, and Metagross, all big names that you can be taking down with the Greninja archetype, mainly thanks to the Shadow Stitching attack that Greninja has, being able to really target down all three of those very ability-focused decks, whilst at the same time gaining huge advantage from your Giant Water Shurikens. Unfavorables, basically it's grass stuff. Golisopod, Decidueye, and Vikavolt all have grass heavy-hitting attackers, and all of them either have some sort of healing or play things like Acerola to pick up damage as well, so they can really just do a lot of work against the Greninja with not much response. New additions for Greninja, just the Guzma. It's basically a tiny addition. It's basically no different from how it has been running. But we have seen the hot techs of Talonflame plus the Break. I think one of the closest masters to make the top 8 played a Greninja list with Talonflame from memory. And, you know, I've just said that all the grass stuff is a problem. If you play Talonflame plus the Break, maybe that's a little bit less of a problem. If you play Talonflame, maybe you lead that, and maybe there are some decks that rely on taking early prizes on Froakies to win the matchup against Greninja, and because you're a tankier Pokemon, maybe you don't lose as much. So I know there's always a debate around Talonflame. It's up to you to continue to debate that, but potentially Talonflame is the only answer you can have to some of these grass-type Pokemon. So moving on from Greninja, we have Mega Rayquaza EX. I made a poll on one of the Facebook pages, Hey Fonte, and for the longest time, Mega Rayquaza was actually tipped off to be the play for Worlds by many players. In at number 5, in my opinion, it does have some good favourables for sure. Volcanion and Gardy are some huge names to take down. Emerald Break is still just such a powerful attack, filling the bench to 8, and getting big one-hit knockouts with a 220 HP beast that is Mega Ray is quite difficult to fathom and quite difficult to beat for a lot of decks, to be honest. And that's the case definitely for Gardy and Volk. They have to commit way more than you do to get one-hit KOs each time. Obviously, they can bounce the stadiums with things like Field Blower or their own stadium, but typically Rayquaza has the resources to recover it and just smack them all over again. Unfavorables include Garbodor Variants. I know there has been like a few Mallow builds out there right now, which are pretty good against Garb. I know Martin Janus is a prominent European player who's been playing Ray for a while now. Even in a Garb-heavy meta, he made top 32 at Liverpool playing, once again, Ray. And I think that would be the way I look to build Rayquaza. I think I'd definitely be playing Mallow, because that limits your item usage. It means you dig out the specific cards rather than having to cycle like 30 cards from your deck, and naturally plenty of items hit the discard pile. So that would be the way I want to play it, to slightly improve your Garb. And Plume Variants always have been traditionally quite difficult for Ray. One thing we do gain, however, is Guzma, and that could be a pretty cool option. I know Ray's typically never played things like Olympia, but just because it's a slow card and you'd rather not play it, now you can have a fast card that also is an out to stall, which is often, at least the Decidueye Vileplume's win condition against Ray. Now you can Guzma and get right back into that active and start smacking them all over again. Couple of hot techs from me. Sudowoodo is one that obviously you're scared of playing against, but playing your own one could be genius because it physically means they don't have enough bench space to put their own Sudowoodo down whilst still getting their own strategy going. So Sudowoodo is sort of the anti-meta to other people trying to play Sudowoodo against you, which is a pretty cool thing you can do. And just in general, you're preventing people from putting down that extra Lele, that extra tech Pokemon. That can be cool. And Oranguru as well is a tech Pokemon that I really like, just because Ray is so aggressive, notorious for doing so, and having Oranguru for when you are obviously going to be end to 1 or 2 cards, you can put yourself into a much better situation where you can get to the golden Ultra Ball amount of cards to give yourself plenty more outs to end the game. Mega Rayquaza in at number 5, and it's one that a few people are talking about for sure. In at number 4, we have Garbodor Variants. It's crazy to think that this archetype was on top spot going into North American internationals, and now it's dropped quite a few places without it really losing anything, and it actually gains a couple of cool cards. Potown is probably an upgrade to Magma's Secret Base, because dealing damage to some of these Stage 2 Pokemon and putting them in range of Garbodors and Drampers could be excellent for you, as long as it stays in play, of course, but at the very least, it serves the same role as Magma Base, so it's never really going to hinder you. And you also gain Necrozma GX as again a potential option. I sort of gushed about it quite a bit when I was talking about Metagross, but in Drampa you're pretty much only using it for the GX attack. If you want to play the Devolve package, you potentially could do in here. I've heard a few people mention that. If you're already playing like Potown, Coco, why not try the Devolve combo as well? So that's potentially an option for you. Hot Techs, I've put down Max Elixir. I feel like the best way to play Garbodor now is by having a 3-3 Garb line rather than a previous 4-4 line, because I think there's quite a handful of decks which are no longer that worried about item usage, especially Gardevoir GX. And gaining those two spaces gives you space for Max Elixir, which means that you're able to go more of a Drampa heavy focus. And Drampa focus is still good. It also means that you can respond a lot more quickly on Kiawe Volcanions. When you're not playing a Max Elixir build, you can be absolutely stuck in the water if they Kiawe and are KOing on 2, because typically you don't have enough energy on the board to start responding with Drampas, and because they've pretty much just gone Lele Kiawe, they're way away from getting enough damage for Trash Launch, so you're really left with nothing. So if you're playing Elixirs, maybe you're able to power up a couple of Drampa and start going 2 for 2. At least that's the goal. If you're playing the Espeon list, I think Jolteon could potentially be more of a consideration now Rayquaza is on the radar. I think Rayquaza isn't naturally like the worst matchup anyway, because, I mean, my own Espeon played Parallel. I don't think it does now, but definitely the Drampa build. Just because Garbodor gets set up, Ability Lock is so annoying for Ray, and when you are replacing the stadium and sometimes getting Righteous Edges off, you can really slow them down in combination with N. So I never felt that Garbodor was super bad against Ray, and it's also pretty good against Decidueye Variants. Only slightly favoured I have it, but definitely if it's like a Plume build, it's kind of a weird standoff, whether you can get your tool on in time or whether they get Plume out too quickly, etc. But Drampa himself is quite good against Plume, just because you can get rid of their DCs, and because they draw so few cards under their own lock, you can deny them attacking sometime as well. So I think it's only slightly favoured against Decidueye, but I do have it in that direction. And then unfavourables, Gardevoir GX. This is the big question mark a lot of people are having about Garbodor. I know a lot of people are still thinking about playing it for Worlds just because we know an optimal 60 pretty much, and it does gain some cool cards. But there is the threat of Gardy, and the big question mark is how much will Gardy actually see play? I've been testing it. I think it's very good. I think a lot of other people are hyping it. It's just whether how many people pull the trigger on their actual 60 cards, if they have enough time to optimize their lists or not. Another unfavourable, as I said, Volcanion. Now that they've gained Kiawe, so much better against Garbodor Variants than they used to be. I've personally slagged off Kiawe, but I've actually started testing Volk, and Kiawe can swing games, especially in this matchup. So, yeah, pretty awkward for you as the Drampa player at the very least. The Espeon player doesn't mind Kiawe too much, but against Espeon, Volk won't be going for Kiawe. They'll be taking easy prizes on like EVs and Trubbishes with power heaters because they want to stay out of psychic range. But regardless, I don't believe Volk is a great matchup for either deck. So yeah, Garbodor in at number 4 because the metagame is shifting a little bit away from Trashalanche being OP, but that does not mean that there will not be any Garbodor at Worlds. Ability Lock is still crazy good for some of the archetypes I've talked about earlier on, and even some more to come. So Garbodor's not dead, it just has to worry about Gardy now, and it's going to be fascinating to see which one prevails. Do people actually bring Gardy, or is it going to be overhyped and no one actually pulls the trigger on it? Who knows? In at number 3, we have Decidueye Variants. Decidueye gains Acerola and Super Scoop Up, two sort of gusting effects, which really bodes well for the tankiness of Decidueye. 240 is still a hurdle for a bunch of archetypes. Being able to not only reset damage, buy yourself an extra turn, but it means you can also get an extra Feather Arrow on the same turn as long as you have Forest in play. So you can Feather Arrow, Acerola, pick up all your things, put it all back down with Forest, and get another Feather Arrow in all at once. It's an amazing combo for you, and it can help you be a little bit more aggressive. Obviously, you lose tempo and attachments, but if you've already got attachments elsewhere, or even just putting a DC and finishing things off with Tapu Lele, that is always an option. So these gusting cards can be incredible for the archetype. I've split it into two just because the Plume variant obviously did well in North America, so is likely going to be on people's radars once again. That also gaining Acerola is pretty cool for you because you can play Rainbow Energy now, damage your own Plume, and on certain turns pick up Vileplume, get a bunch more birds into play, then put Vileplume back down at a later date. That could be really crazy for you as well, so look out for that at Worlds for sure. But there's also the Ninetales variant, and that also did well at the NAIC, got top 4. And I believe that is additionally a pretty cool archetype, not too different. There's again a lot of things you'd like to devolve, and the sort of straight Ninetales Decidueye build normally does play the Espeon, and devolving is incredible right now, so having the option just to ping things with Cocoa spreads as well, you can end games before they really begin, and that's also pretty cool. For hot techs, obviously if you're playing the Ninetales build, I'd suggest the new Ninetales. This could be a pretty cool one-of, just because it can help stall, and if you're playing Rainbow Energies, which already suits Acerola, you could be attacking with the Alolan Ninetales, and also hitting Volcanions for weakness, and having another card in the deck that's not weak to fire is a pretty good idea for you. And if you're playing the Plume variant, again, with Volcanion in mind, one of the biggest downsides of wanting to play Decidueye is you're worried about Volk. If you have the new Vileplume in your list, basically Volk needs to play Hex, and it's very rare that Volk will do that. So you could win the game just by getting a Vileplume up and not putting down 6 prizes on the rest of your board, because Volks are very rarely playing Hex, basically, and they need that to beat the Vileplume. So, yeah, pretty good for you. Favourables, I have Guardi as favoured. Mainly, I've been testing... well, I've tested both sides, really. If you're playing the Plume build, it's hard for them to get set up, even with Diancie, because you can just sort of zerg it down with early Lele attack plus a few pings, and you can just prevent them from getting into multiple Guardi and just fighting them early on in the game. Or if you're playing the Ninetales build, you're normally going for Cocoa spreads, Feather Arrows all over the board, devolving them. So I believe Guardi's a good matchup for Decidueye, and I also... obviously, Greninja, quite an easy one. Thanks to weakness, you're just absolutely splurging them down each time. You have a lot of time to attach energy as well, so your Acerolas do come in very handy for when they're just stitching you away. You can pick yourself all back up, plonk it all back down, and start attaching to it all over again, as long as you have another Decidueye ready to go, which normally you do because you have like 3 turns just to start building the board and attaching energy. So Greninja, also a pretty good matchup. Decidueye, I still like, for sure. One I'm always going to test out because it's just a consistent performer, and I don't think there's too many things standing in its way, so pretty good deck for sure. In at number 2 we have Volcanion. This seems to be the deck that's gained the most from the new set. You get a cool non-water weak GX Pokemon in Ho-Oh. You also get Kiawe and Guzma, 2 great supporter additions for the deck potentially. Guzma is guaranteed to go in Volk. He's just way too good because you can basically ignore the heavy retreat cost on all your dudes, which is something Volcanion has been longing for, basically. Ho-Oh as well is pretty cool. You can KO Drampers even under Ability Lock, and you can have an out to Greninja, which is otherwise one of your unfavourables. I believe if you actually play Ho-Oh and Fury Belt, that matchup doesn't even become unfavourable anymore. I think it's like average. You're not actually too worried about Ninja, especially because they can so often just clunk on themselves. So Ho-Oh, I think, is definitely a tech that I probably would play. Kiawe is one I would play now that I've played it more. I know I did a list earlier this week, but that was more theory craft than many tests. Now I've seen turns where Kiawe just swings the game because of certain board states, so having the one-of option is just pretty crazy. I would also consider Hex Maniac. Hex, not just for the Vileplume that I was talking about on the last slide, more so for things like Bulu, and Metagross and Guardi, where you can hex them and they are unlikely to respond on you. It's going to be pretty crazy because then the next turn you can just star me into a bunch of fire energies, steam up and KO. It's pretty nutty. I don't think you have space for everything. Don't think you have space for Ho-Oh, Kiawe and Hex. Maybe you pick your battles, but I think all could be considerations for sure. And Volk has a bunch of favourables. You can eat up the grass decks of Decidueye and Golisopod, and again with your typing you can eat up Metagross. Many people think that the Guardi isn't even a terrible matchup, So I've got it unfavorable down on the slides here, but maybe if you've tested it more than I have, you may be more comfortable taking Volk. I know a bunch of people are talking about this deck. It's very consistent. It's a basic deck. It hits hard. It ticks a lot of boxes, and I know that this will be a popular one for sure. Finally, we have the newcomer Gardevoir GX. It comes into the format as a new archetype and is already being given the burden of having best deck in format put on its shoulders. It's a heavy weight to bear, and it's an interesting one for certain because it's a Worlds format. It's pretty much unknown. It's the first time we are playing with all these cards in a big tournament, and especially one as high stakes as this. People have to be confident with their deck, and it will only be those people who have tested extensively with Gardy that will do well with the deck, I believe. But I believe the inherent power level of Gardevoir is just very, very, very strong. Although it is a potentially slow stage 2, I see that tag thrown on it a lot. It's actually kind of a fast stage 2, because on turn 2, you could be doing Infinite Force for 2-hit knockouts. I like playing Max Potion as well in the deck, so you can tank hits, heal, and just reattach. If you're going for early 2 shots at the very least. You have artillery support, so you're pretty much end-proof. There's a lot of good things about Gardy, and again, it has some decent matchups. I have Volk as fairly favoured. Obviously, Garbodor is a favoured matchup as well, thanks to your GX attack, Twilight GX, putting all those items back into the deck, basically forcing them to only attack with Drampers, which again are really terrible in the matchup, because they have to commit 3 energy to themselves, which means that Dramper effectively has 90 HP. That is absolute bread and butter for Gardy to hit. And Golisopod as well. They're capped at 120. Sometimes even with things like Lurantis and stuff, they're going to stay out of range of the 1-hits. Again, I float back to my own list, where this is basically my own experience. They'll typically go ahead in the prize race because Golisopod takes these early knockouts, but once you get into your Gardy and you're able to Secret Spring enough energy to the 1-shot range, it's going to be pretty good for you, because basically Gardy takes 4 prizes that time, because you built it fully, you take a knockout, they try and 2-hit you, then you take another 2 prizes, and you basically catch up in the race in that regard. And especially when you're throwing ends their way, it can be even more awkward for them. So I think Gardy has a handful of really good favourables. A couple of awkward ones, of course. There's going to be the Greninja players out there. There's potentially going to be Metagross. I'm not certain that there'll be a huge amount of it, but if other people are super hype on Gardy, obviously I've put it in at number 1 here. But this is really, like, it's my most anticipated deck, to be honest, more than anything else. I don't think it'll be the most popular archetype. And we have to remember at Worlds, even the most popular deck may not even be 10% of the field. So people playing Metagross may have a rude awakening when they realise not everyone is playing Gardy. Think about last year where there was, like, Night March had just won the national championships in the US, and it was highly anticipated for Worlds, and even Night March as a known archetype for like the whole year as being consistently very, very good, it wasn't even played a huge amount. It was played, like, I would say less than 15%. So especially for a new archetype being placed, being crowned like king of the format, basically jumping into it, it's going to be interesting to see how many people actually pull the trigger on Gardy. I, for one, think it's great, but it's just about how many other people play the deck enough and are happy enough with their list in order to pull the trigger on Gardy. I think it'll do really well. A couple of hot techs. You can see that Greninja and Ray are 2 bad matchups for you. You can tech for either of them. Take your pick, basically. You could play both, but again, consistency is already kind of an issue for a chunky stage 2 deck, so maybe you go no techs and accept a few bad matchups along the way, or maybe you tech it out and hope to get through regardless of a couple of clunk turns and a couple of janky games where you have to shuffle up and go to game 2. Up to you guys, but yeah, Gardy, very strong deck for certain, and at the very least it keeps Garbodor in a lot of... It gives the Garbodor players a lot to think about, because they could be running into a really bad matchup for them. And previously, Garbodor hasn't had such a check, and it's a pretty cool dynamic to see this enter the format. A few other archetypes outside the top 10 that I thought are worth mentioning. A couple of stage 1s, non-EXs, in a very heavy GX field could do very well. Something like Vespiquen or Gyarados, things that can ramp very high for just a double colourless energy, could be great picks. Vespiquen, again, playing things like evolutions. Eevees right now are very strong with Volk, with Metagross, with Decidueye, with Golisopod. All these things get caught up against the Eevees. You can even play Klefki if you're expecting Ray to come back. That, again, could be great for you. So Vespi could, again, be back on the radar and seems like a good pick to me. Only has to be super concerned about things like Decidueye and other Vileplume builds. Gyarados, obviously, again, it's very similar to Vesp, but a lot more all-in. It would auto-lose to Decidueye, but hits harder against everything else, and it's probably more consistent than Vesp, so if you want to go all-in, Gyarados is maybe your play. Sounds like a great day one play to me, Gyarados, to be honest, because you can afford 2 losses, and I'd be surprised if you face like 3 of the same archetype in day 1 of Worlds, especially if it's only 6 rounds. You'd have to have a really weird day in order for that to happen, so I can see Gyarados making it through to day 2 at least, and then who knows, from there it could continue to do well. The new Darkrai may be experimented with in Turbo Dark. That's an interesting option for you. I've not invested much time into it, so I couldn't really tell you how good it is, but I think it's Darkrai. People will play it. It, again, has quite a good Garbodor. I don't know how good its Guardi is, but if you can race them down, it may be okay. There may be some techs in there as well that can help you beat it. Things like Bisharp even, who knows. So yeah, Dark is potentially an option. Aquabox I quite like. I've tested it for a bit. Articuno right now is crazy in the meta. Like, really, really good for you. Being able to take 2 prizes on like Vulpix, Ralts, Rowlet, all these low HP things is crazy. Great tempo. And then the Ice Beam GX does get a lot worse in the game, but Tapu Fini is a nice replacement GX attack, especially against stage 2s. Gusting basically like a 4 energy Guardia away really hurts them tempo-wise, and then maybe the coast is clear for you to come in with your Lapras and start swinging again, so who knows. And then finally, Noivern. I doubt we'll see a lot of Noivern at Worlds, to be honest. I think it'll be a couple of crazy souls out there who want to keep Quaking Punching all day and all night. But I think if someone gets it right, Noivern has the potential to be very dangerous. There's a lot of special energy in format. Obviously, items are prevalent, and even Boomburst is a good option. I think Noivern in a vacuum is such a strong card that people may still bring it to Worlds, no matter what. So those are just my 2 cents. These are all not quite in the top 10, but definitely worth considering. I think for certain, Vespi and Gyarados are great considerations, and ones that are kind of on my radar as well. So, thanks so much for watching, guys. Do you agree with my top 10? There's a lot of debate going on, a lot of theorying on what's going to see play, in how much percentage and such. It's a lot of double guessing right now. A lot of cool polls going on in Verbank and Hey Fonte, and a lot of different articles coming around and videos out there right now. And basically, pretty much everyone's on different opinions on what's going to win, what's going to be the most popular deck. Who knows? So I've done my best to do this top 10. If you don't agree with the ranking, that's absolutely fine. Tell me your top 10. In what order? What have I missed? Is there another archetype out there that has completely gone over my head? Who knows? And maybe even your World's prediction of what deck will win. I'd love to hit all of your comments down below. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Leave a like to the video if you did. This took a while to get ready. And come say hi to me at Worlds as well. I'll be, you know, the guy who you see on the screen the whole time, just in the flesh. And I'll be walking around, playing games, all that good stuff, and it's always great to see support from you guys. And yeah, have fun at Worlds, and I'll see you in another video. See you next time.